The thugs didn't know they just messed with a sambo champion. Now they'll never forget. Nikolai Kolya-Volkov had always been the type of kid who preferred the quiet of the library to the noise of the stadium. At 17, his unassuming appearance and reserved nature made him blend into the background as he navigated the bustling corridors of Lyceum No. 7. Barely reaching 170 centimeters and weighing perhaps 65 kilograms after a good steam bath, Kolya looked like a strong gust of wind could knock him over. His slightly crooked glasses framed thoughtful grey eyes that seemed to observe everything without giving anything away. Most students barely registered his presence, despite him having been at Lyceum No. 7 for almost 2 years. What they definitely didn't know was that Kolya spent every evening at his grandfather's old training hall near the Moskva River, where he'd been practicing sambo since he was 10. His grandfather, Dmitry Ivanovich, had been a decorated sambo master in the Soviet army before retiring, and he'd taught Kolya everything: throws, holds, submissions, strikes. Kolya could have easily dominated any school wrestling competition, but he kept his skills hidden. His babushka, years ago, had made him promise to only use his abilities for self-defense. She'd seen too many young men in their apartment block get caught up in petty squabbles and escalating violence. Your strength is for protecting, not for showing off, she'd always told him. The trouble began on a Wednesday morning in early October. Kolya was hurrying through the main hall, trying to get to his history class before the bell, when he accidentally bumped into Anton the Bear Medvedev. Anton was everything Kolya wasn't, over 190 centimeters tall, built like a refrigerator, with the confidence that came from being the star hockey player and dating the most popular girl in school. His dark hair was always perfectly combed, and his expensive sports jacket seemed permanently attached to his broad shoulders. "Watch it, shrimp," Anton growled, shoving Kolya hard enough to send his textbooks flying across the linoleum floor. The hallway went silent as dozens of students turned to watch. Kolya knelt to gather his things, his face burning with shame. He could feel everyone's eyes on him, but no one offered to help. Anton's cronies, Boris the Bull Kozlov and Sergei the Snake Smirnov, snickered as they surrounded Kolya. Boris was almost as big as Anton, with arms covered in amateur tattoos he'd gotten during summer camp. Sergei was smaller, but more vicious, with narrow, calculating eyes and a reputation for starting fights with anyone he considered weak. "What's wrong, bookworm? Can't handle a little nudge?" Boris sneered, kicking one of Kolya's textbooks further down the hall. "Maybe you should stick to the library where you belong." Kolya gathered his books without looking up, his jaw tight. "Just walk away," he told himself. "It's not worth it." He stood slowly, adjusting his glasses, and tried to step around them. But Anton moved to block his path. "I don't think we're finished here," Anton said, his voice dripping with the condescension bullies used when they sensed fear. "You bumped into me. Don't you think you owe me an apology?" The crowd of students grew larger, forming a loose circle around them. Kolya could hear hushed whispers, phones being pulled out to record. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched his books tighter. He looked up at Anton's face, seeing the cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Izvinite," Kolya mumbled, his voice barely audible. "What was that?" "I didn't hear you." Anton cupped his ear mockingly. "I said I'm sorry," Kolya repeated, louder this time. "That's better. But next time, watch where you're going, or we might have a real problem." Anton stepped aside with a theatrical bow, and his friends laughed as Kolya hurried past them. The rest of the day passed in a haze of sidelong glances and stifled laughter. By lunchtime, everyone had heard about the incident. Kolya sat alone at his usual table in the corner of the canteen, picking at his piroshki while trying to ignore the stares. He pulled out his phone and texted his grandfather, "Had a bad day. See you at the hall tonight." Dmitry Ivanovich's response came quickly. "The mat doesn't lie, grandson. Come ready to work." That afternoon, Kolya threw himself into training with unusual ferocity. He spent 2 hours practicing throws and submissions, his movements sharp and precise. Dmitry Ivanovich watched from across the hall, noticing the tension in his grandson's shoulders. "Something's troubling you," Dmitry Ivanovich said, when Kolya finally stopped, sweat pouring down his face. Kolya shrugged, wiping his face with a towel. "Just some hooligans at school. You want to talk about it?" "Nothing to talk about. I handled it." Dmitry Ivanovich studied him for a moment. "Handling something and letting it fester are two different things, Kolya. You remember what I taught you about respect? That it's earned, not given. And sometimes people need to learn the hard way that they've underestimated someone, but you choose your battles wisely." Dmitry Ivanovich handed him a water bottle. "Just remember, you're not a victim unless you choose to be." The words stayed with Kolya through the next few days as the bullying intensified. Anton and his friends seemed to have singled him out as their new favorite target. They'd appear wherever he was, blocking his path in hallways, knocking his books out of his hands, making snide remarks about his clothes or his appearance whenever teachers weren't around. The worst part wasn't the physical harassment. It was the way other students watched without intervening. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. On Friday, things took a darker turn. Kolya was eating lunch alone when Boris and Sergei approached his table. Anton was nowhere to be seen, which somehow made it even more unsettling. "Hey, glasses," Boris said, sliding into the seat across from Kolya. "We've been thinking. You seem pretty lonely over here all by yourself." Sergei sat down next to him, trapping Kolya. "Yeah, we thought maybe you could use some friends. What do you say?" Kolya looked around the canteen. Students at nearby tables were pretending not to notice, but he could feel their attention like the heat from a samovar. He started to stand, but Boris's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. "Now, that's not very friendly. We're trying to have a conversation here." "Let go of me," Kolya said quietly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Or what?" Sergei leaned closer, his breath smelling of cheap cigarettes. "You'll tell a teacher? You'll run to babushka?" Boris squeezed Kolya's wrist harder. "See, here's the thing. Anton thinks you disrespected him the other day. And when someone disrespects Anton, they disrespect all of us. So we figured we'd give you a chance to make it right." "What do you want?" Kolya asked. "Nothing much. Just want you to remember your place around here." Boris twisted Kolya's wrist slightly, just enough to cause pain, without being obvious to anyone watching. "Guys like you need to understand that guys like us run this school. Stay out of our way, keep your mouth shut, and maybe we'll leave you alone." Kolya felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't just casual bullying anymore. This was a deliberate campaign to make his life miserable. He thought about his grandfather's words, about choosing battles wisely, but he also thought about his babushka's advice about only using his abilities for self-defense. What am I protecting by staying silent? He wondered. Boris finally released his wrist, and Kolya rubbed the red marks on his skin. The two thugs stood up, their point made. "Glad we could have this little chat," Sergei said with a smirk. "See you around, Kolya." The use of his name sent a shiver down Kolya's spine. They'd been paying attention, learning about him. This wasn't random anymore. That night at the training hall, Kolya worked harder than ever. He sparred with his grandfather, taking out his frustration on the mats and the training dummies. Dmitry Ivanovich could see the change in him, the way his movements had become more aggressive, more focused. "You're angry," Dmitry Ivanovich observed as they cooled down. "Yeah, I'm angry." "Good. Anger can be fuel if you use it right, but don't let it consume you." Dmitry Ivanovich handed him a water bottle. "What are you going to do about whatever's happening at school?" Kolya was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet. Babushka always said, 'Your babushka is a wise woman,' but she also knows that sometimes a man has to stand up for himself. The question is, when is that time?" The answer came sooner than Kolya expected. Monday morning started like any other day, but there was a tension in the air that Kolya could feel as soon as he walked through the school doors. Students were gathering in groups, whispering and looking around as if expecting something to happen. Kolya made it to his first 3 classes without incident, but by lunchtime his nerves were frayed. He was walking to his locker when he saw the crowd gathered near the gymnasium. Students were pressed against the walls, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Kolya tried to walk past, but something made him stop. In the center of the crowd, he could hear Anton's voice, loud and taunting. "Where is he? Where's our little friend Kolya?" Kolya's blood ran cold. He pushed through the crowd, and what he saw made his hands clench into fists. They had his backpack. Anton was holding it up like a trophy while Boris rummaged through it, pulling out his belongings and tossing them on the floor. His books, his notebooks, his calculator, everything scattered across the hallway floor. "Look at this," Boris said, holding up a photo that had fallen out of one of Kolya's textbooks. It was a picture of Kolya with his babushka from last New Year's, both of them smiling at the camera. "Oh, Mama's boy carries a picture of babushka to school." The crowd laughed, and Kolya felt something snap inside him. That photo was precious to him. It was taken just a few months after his babushka had recovered from a serious illness, when they'd finally been able to celebrate together again. "Give that back," Kolya said, his voice cutting through the laughter. The crowd parted as he stepped forward. Anton turned, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, look who finally decided to show up. We were just looking at your stuff, Kolya. Hope you don't mind." "Give me the photo," Kolya repeated, his voice steadier now. Boris held the picture up, pretending to examine it. "You know, she's not bad looking for an old lady. Maybe I should keep this. Give her a call sometime." The words hit Kolya like a physical blow. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears, feel his vision narrowing. Around him, the crowd had gone completely silent, sensing that something was about to change. "That's my babushka," Kolya said quietly. "Give me the photo." Sergei laughed. "Oh, he's getting tough now. What are you going to do about it, Four Eyes? You going to make us?" Kolya looked around at the faces surrounding him, dozens of students watching, waiting to see what would happen. Some looked excited, others uncomfortable, but none of them were going to help him. Teachers were nowhere to be seen. They never were when things like this happened. He thought about his babushka, about the promise he'd made to her. He thought about his grandfather's words about choosing battles wisely, and he realized that this wasn't about pride or reputation anymore. This was about protecting something that mattered to him. "Last chance," Kolya said, his voice so quiet that the crowd had to strain to hear him. "Give me my things back." Anton stepped forward, towering over Kolya by nearly 20 centimeters. "Or what, little man? You going to fight all 3 of us?" Kolya looked up at him, and for the first time, Anton saw something in those grey eyes that made him take a half-step back. There was no fear there anymore, no pleading or desperation, just a cold, calculating calm that seemed completely at odds with the skinny kid in front of him. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Kolya said, his voice carrying a new edge that made several students in the crowd shift nervously. "Give me my photo." Boris laughed nervously and held the picture higher. "What if I just—" He started to tear it. Kolya moved faster than anyone thought possible. One moment he was standing a meter away. The next, he was right in front of Boris, his hand locked around Boris's wrist with a grip that made the bigger boy yelp in pain. The photo fluttered to the ground as Boris tried to pull away, but Kolya's grip was like a steel clamp. "What the hell?" Anton started forward, but stopped when Kolya looked at him. "Don't," Kolya said simply. The word carried such quiet authority that Anton actually took a step back. Kolya squeezed Boris's wrist harder, and Boris dropped to one knee, his face contorting in pain. "You're breaking it," Boris gasped. "Not yet," Kolya replied calmly. But I will if you don't pick up that photo and hand it to me. Boris scrambled for the photo with his free hand, practically shoving it at Kolya. The moment Kolya released him, Boris scrambled backward, cradling his wrist. The entire hallway was dead silent. Kolya bent down and carefully gathered his books, his movements deliberate and unhurried. When he stood up, Anton and Sergei were both staring at him like they'd never seen him before. "How did you—" Sergei started. "Doesn't matter." Kolya cut him off. He shouldered his backpack and looked at each of them in turn. "Here's how this is going to work from now on. You're going to leave me alone. You're going to leave my things alone. And if I ever see you bothering anyone else the way you've been bothering me, we're going to have another conversation." "You can't threaten us," Anton said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Kolya smiled, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just explaining the new rules." He started to walk away, then paused and looked back. "Oh, and Anton, next time you want to know what I'm capable of, just ask. Could have saved you some embarrassment." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Kolya walked through them, their whispered conversations starting before he'd even turned the corner. Behind him, Anton was helping Boris to his feet, both of them looking shaken. "What just happened?" someone in the crowd whispered. "Did you see how fast he moved? Boris is twice his size. How did he—" Kolya didn't stick around to hear the rest. He walked straight to the bathroom, locked himself in a stall, and let his hands shake for exactly 1 minute. Then he took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and went to his next class. Word spread through Lyceum number 7 like a winter cold. By the end of the day, everyone had heard some version of what happened in the hallway. Most of the stories were exaggerated. Kolya had thrown Boris across the hallway. He'd broken Anton's nose. He'd taken on all 3 thugs at once. But the core truth remained. The quiet kid with the glasses had stood up to the school's biggest bullies and come out on top. At his locker after school, Kolya was surprised to find Irina Sokolova waiting for him. Irina was in his advanced mathematics class, a smart, pretty girl who'd never spoken to him before. "Privet," she said as he approached. "I heard about what happened at lunch." Kolya opened his locker, not sure how to respond. "News travels fast. Boris is telling everyone you attacked him for no reason. But I saw the whole thing." She paused. "I'm sorry no one helped you. We should have." Kolya looked at her, seeing genuine regret in her eyes. "It's okay. Not everyone's a fighter. Maybe not. But everyone should stand up for what's right." She hesitated. "Where did you learn to do that? What you did to Boris, I mean." Kolya shrugged. "My grandfather has an old training hall near the river. Been training there for a few years. Training in what? Sambo. Mostly." Irina's eyes widened. "You're a sambist? Like, for real?" "I guess. Never really thought about it that way." "And you never told anyone?" Kolya closed his locker and shouldered his backpack. Didn't seem important. Still doesn't. As he walked away, Irina called after him. "Kolya, what you did today, it was brave." Kolya paused at the door. "No, it wasn't. Brave would have been standing up to them the first time. Today was just necessary." That evening at the training hall, Dmitry Ivanovich took one look at Kolya and nodded approvingly. "Lutsche," he said simply. "Lutsche, how? You're walking different, standing different. What happened?" Kolya told him the whole story as they warmed up. Dmitry Ivanovich listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of approval. "And how do you feel about it?" Dmitry Ivanovich asked when Kolya finished. "Honestly? Good. But also, I don't know. Scared, maybe?" "Scared of what?" Kolya thought about it as he wrapped his hands. "Scared that I liked it. The look on their faces when they realized they'd underestimated me. Scared that maybe I'm not as peaceful as I thought I was." Dmitry Ivanovich smiled. "You think warriors are born without fear, without anger. The difference between a fighter and a thug is knowing when to use that power. Today, you used it to protect something precious to you. That's exactly what it's for. What if they come back? What if they bring friends? Then you'll handle it. But I don't think they will. Thugs are predators, Kolya. They hunt the weak and the isolated. You showed them today that you're neither. Word will spread, and it won't just be those three who think twice before messing with you. Dmitry Ivanovich was right. Tuesday morning brought a completely different experience for Kolya. As he walked through the hallways, he noticed the change immediately. Students who had never looked at him before were nodding as he passed. Some even said, "Zdravstvuyte." The respect in their voices was something entirely new. Anton, Boris and Sergei were nowhere to be seen during the morning, but Kolya spotted them at lunch. They were sitting at their usual table, but the dynamic had shifted. Anton was still the leader, but there was a tension there that hadn't existed before. When Anton caught Kolya looking, he quickly looked away. Kolya was settling into his usual corner table when someone sat down across from him. It was Andrei Petrov, a sophomore who'd been one of Anton's frequent targets. Andrei was small for his age, with a nervous demeanor that made him seem even younger. "Privet," Andrei said nervously. "Mind if I sit here?" Kolya gestured to the empty chairs. "Svobodno. I heard what you did to Boris and them." "That true?" "Depends what you heard." Andrei smiled for the first time Kolya had ever seen. "I heard you made Boris cry." "He didn't cry," Kolya said mildly. "But he did learn some manners. Think you could... would you maybe..." Andrei struggled with the words. "They've been bothering you?" Andrei nodded. "Every day since school started. Taking my lunch money, shoving me around. Normal stuff, I guess." Kolya studied the younger boy's face. "What's your name?" "Andrei Petrov." "Petrov? Like Viktor Petrov?" Andrei's face reddened. "He's my older brother." Kolya set down his piroshki. "Your brother's been bullying you?" "Not him directly, but he lets his friends do it, and he laughs when they tell him about it." Andrei's voice got smaller. "Says it's toughening me up." Kolya felt a familiar anger building in his chest, but this time it was cold and controlled. "That's going to stop. You can't make Victor... I'm not going to make Victor do anything. I'm going to have a conversation with Boris and Sergei, and then they're going to leave you alone." Andrei's eyes widened. "You'd do that? For me? Nobody deserves to be pushed around just because they're smaller. And family's supposed to protect family, not throw them to the wolves." That afternoon, Kolya waited outside the school gates after classes. He knew Boris and Sergei usually came out this way after hockey practice. Sure enough, they appeared 20 minutes later, still in their practice gear, talking and laughing about something. They stopped when they saw Kolya leaning against the fence. "What do you want?" Boris asked, his voice wary. "Need to talk to you both for a minute." Sergei looked around nervously. "About what?" "Andrei Petrov." The two exchanged glances. "What about him?" Boris asked. "You know what about him. The lunch money, the shoving, all of it. It stops today. Boris tried to muster some of his old bravado. You can't tell us what to do." Kolya pushed off from the fence and took a step forward. Both boys immediately took a step back. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm explaining what's going to happen. You're going to leave Andrei alone. You're going to tell everyone else to leave Andrei alone. And if I hear about anyone messing with him, I'm going to assume it came from you two." "You can't protect everyone," Sergei said, but his voice shook slightly. "Maybe not everyone. But I can protect Andrei, and anyone else who needs it." Kolya looked them both in the eye. "We understand each other?" Boris nodded quickly. Sergei took a moment longer, but eventually nodded too. "Good. Oh, and guys, what happened with Boris's wrist the other day? That was me being gentle. Next time I might not be in such a good mood." Kolya walked away, leaving them standing there. He didn't look back, but he could feel their eyes on him until he turned the corner. The change at Lyceum No. 7 was gradual, but undeniable. Within a week, Kolya had gained a reputation as someone you didn't mess with. But more importantly, he'd become someone that the underdogs could turn to. Students who'd been suffering in silence started approaching him, sometimes just to talk, sometimes asking for help. Kolya found himself becoming an accidental protector. He didn't go looking for trouble, but when trouble found someone who couldn't handle it themselves, Kolya was there. A quiet word here, a meaningful look there. Sometimes just his presence was enough to make bullies think twice. Anton, Boris, and Sergei adapted to the new reality in different ways. Anton tried to maintain his status by picking on targets he thought Kolya wouldn't protect, but even that backfired when Kolya made it clear that his protection extended to anyone who needed it. Boris became almost pathetically eager to avoid any conflict with Kolya, going out of his way to be polite whenever their paths crossed. Sergei seemed to harbor the most resentment, but he was smart enough to keep it to himself. The real test came 3 weeks after the hallway incident. Kolya was walking to his bus stop after school when he heard raised voices from behind the school building. He followed the sound and found Anton cornering a freshman girl named Elena Smirnova, demanding she give him her homework assignment. "I don't have it," Elena was saying, her voice trembling. "I haven't even finished it yet." "Don't lie to me," Anton sneered. "I know you're in Mrs. Petrova's class. She always gives out the assignments early." Kolya stepped around the corner. "Problem here?" Anton spun around, his face flushing when he saw Kolya. "This doesn't concern you." "Elena, tai vi porядке?" Kolya asked, ignoring Anton completely. The girl nodded quickly. He was just asking about the homework. "Well, now he's done asking." Kolya looked at Anton. "Right?" Anton's jaw worked silently for a moment. Kolya could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, the desire to maintain his image warring with the knowledge of what Kolya was capable of. "Right," Anton finally said. "We're done here." He started to walk away, then turned back. "This isn't over, Volkov," Kolya smiled. "Yeah, it is. You just don't know it yet." After Anton left, Elena looked at Kolya with wide eyes. "Spasibo. He was really scaring me. He won't bother you again. But Elena, if anyone gives you trouble, you come find me, okay?" She nodded eagerly and hurried away. Kolya watched her go, then pulled out his phone to text his grandfather. "Training tonight. Need to work on something." Dmitry Ivanovich's response came quickly. "Always ready. What are we working on?" Kolya thought for a moment, then typed back, "Leadership." That evening, as Kolya practiced his throws, Dmitry Ivanovich watched him with pride. His grandson had grown in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. The scared, quiet boy who'd been getting pushed around was gone, replaced by a young man who understood that true power came with responsibility. "You know," Dmitry Ivanovich said during a water break, "your babushka called me today." Kolya looked up, surprised. "What did she say?" "She said some parents from your school have been calling her, thanking her for raising such a good grandson." "Thanking her?" "Apparently, word's gotten around about what you've been doing, standing up for the kids who can't stand up for themselves. Some parents are calling you a geroi." Kolya felt his face get hot. "I'm not a geroi. I just don't like seeing people get picked on." "That's exactly what makes you a geroi, grandson. Gerois don't do what they do for recognition. They do it because it's right." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the training hall door opening. Kolya looked over and was surprised to see Andrei Petrov walking in, followed by his parents. "Kolya," Andrei called out, "my parents wanted to meet you." Dmitry Ivanovich nudged Kolya toward the newcomers. Andrei's father was a tall man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. His mother was small, like Andrei, but there was determination in her expression. "Kolya Volkov," Kolya said politely. "Mr. and Mrs. Petrov," Andrei's father said, "we wanted to thank you for what you did for Andrei. He told us what's been happening at school and how you stepped in." "It wasn't a big deal," Kolya said. It was to us, Andrei's mother said firmly. Our son was coming home with bruises and torn clothes, and we couldn't get him to tell us what was happening. Now he's walking taller, smiling again. That's because of you. Andrei stepped forward. I told them about your grandfather's training hall. They said I could join, if it's okay with you. Kolya looked at Dmitry Ivanovich, who nodded approvingly. Always room for one more student, Dmitry Ivanovich said, especially one who wants to learn for the right reasons. As they discussed schedules and training programs, Kolya felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the workout. This was what his babushka had meant about protecting instead of showing off. This was what real strength looked like. Over the next few months, Kolya's reputation at Lyceum No. 7 solidified. He wasn't the biggest or the loudest student, but he was respected in a way that Anton and his friends had never been. Students sought him out not just for protection, but for advice. Teachers began to notice the change in the school's atmosphere. There were fewer fights, less bullying, more students willing to speak up when they saw something wrong. Anton made one last attempt to reclaim his status in early December. He'd been drinking at a party and decided to confront Kolya in front of a crowd of students. The confrontation happened in the school courtyard on a Friday afternoon, with dozens of witnesses. You think you're so tough, Anton slurred, clearly still feeling the effects of the weekend. But you sucker-punched Boris. That's not fighting, that's cheating. Kolya, who was on his way to the bus stop, looked at Anton with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Go home, Anton. Sleep it off. Don't tell me what to do. Anton threw a wild, clumsy punch that Kolya easily avoided. What happened next was over so quickly that most of the witnesses weren't sure what they'd seen. Kolya stepped inside Anton's reach, executed a quick leg takedown, and gently controlled his fall so that Anton ended up sitting on the snow-covered ground, looking confused and embarrassed rather than hurt. Stay down, Kolya said quietly. Tie Zakonchil. Anton looked up at him, and for the first time, Kolya saw something other than arrogance in the other boy's eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also a kind of resigned acceptance. Anton finally understood that he was completely outmatched. Da, Anton said softly. Zakonchil. He struggled to his feet and walked away, leaving behind the image he'd spent years cultivating. By the next day, everyone knew that Anton Medvedev was no longer the king of Lyceum No. 7. But more importantly, they understood that Kolya Volkov wasn't trying to take his place. The final confrontation came not with Anton, but with his enablers. Boris and Sergei, perhaps feeling that their protection was gone with Anton's defeat, decided to make one last play for relevance. They cornered Kolya in the hallway after school, when most students had already left. You got lucky with Anton, Boris said, his voice shaking with false bravado. But there's two of us and one of you. Kolya set his backpack down slowly. You sure you want to do this? We're not afraid of you anymore, Sergei lied. Kolya sighed. Okay, but let's make this quick. I've got training tonight. What followed wasn't really a fight so much as a demonstration. Kolya had spent years learning how to disable opponents quickly and efficiently. Boris charged first, throwing a clumsy punch that Kolya easily dodged. A quick leg sweep sent Boris sprawling to the ground, where Kolya pinned him with a knee on his chest and one hand controlling his wrist. Sergei hesitated for just a moment too long. Kolya swept his legs without even getting up from Boris, then controlled both boys with practiced ease. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. Here's what's going to happen, Kolya said calmly, as if he were discussing homework instead of holding two boys twice his size in submission holds. You're going to stop trying to be tough guys. You're going to find something better to do with your time, and you're going to leave everyone at this school alone. We can't breathe, Boris gasped. Yeah, that's kind of the point. Do we have an understanding? Both boys nodded frantically. Kolya released them and stood up, brushing snow off his pants. Korosho, see you around school. He picked up his backpack and walked away, leaving Boris and Sergei lying on the floor, gasping and staring at the ceiling. That night, Kolya found his babushka waiting for him in the kitchen when he got home from the training hall. "Sadis, vnuchok," she said, using the pet name she'd called him since childhood. Kolya sat across from her at the small table, wondering if he was in trouble. "Babushka, if this is about what happened at school, I'm proud of you," she said simply. Kolya blinked in surprise. "You are?" "Mrs. Smirnova called me today. Elena Smirnova's mother. She told me what you did for her daughter, and she's not the first parent to call." His babushka reached across the table and took his hand. "You remember what I told you about your strength being for protecting?" Kolya nodded. "You've been protecting people, not hurting them out of anger or pride, but protecting them because they needed protecting. That's what a man does. I broke my promise to you, though. I used violence." His babushka smiled. "You used your strength to help people who couldn't help themselves. That's not violence, vnuchok. That's justice." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then his babushka spoke again. "Your grandfather tells me you've been different lately. More uvereny, I guess. I don't feel scared anymore." "Scared of what?" Kolya thought about it. "Scared of being weak, I guess. Scared that people would always see me as an easy target. And now I know that being quiet doesn't mean being weak, and being strong doesn't mean being loud." He smiled. "I like who I am now." His babushka squeezed his hand. "Korosho. Because I've always liked who you are." The rest of Kolya's senior year passed peacefully. The culture at Lyceum No. 7 had shifted in subtle but important ways. Bullying didn't disappear entirely, but it was no longer tolerated the way it had been. Students were more likely to speak up, more willing to help each other. And everyone knew that if things got really bad, Kolya Volkov would be there. Kolya never sought out conflict, but he didn't back down from it either. He'd learned the difference between fighting and protecting, between strength and aggression. His reputation grew not because he was the toughest kid in school, but because he was the one who stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. On graduation day, as Kolya walked across the stage to receive his attestat, he looked out at the audience and saw faces he recognized. Andrei Petrov, now confident and strong after months of training at Dmitry Ivanovich's training hall. Elena Smirnova, who had become one of his closest friends. Even Viktor Petrov was there, having found new purpose as a mentor for younger students. After the ceremony, Dmitry Ivanovich found Kolya outside the auditorium. "Gordy za teba, vnuchok," he said, pulling Kolya into a hug. "Spasibo, dedushka, for everything. You know what I'm proudest of?" Kolya shook his head. "You never became them. You could have. You were strong enough, angry enough, but you chose to be better." Dmitry Ivanovich smiled. "That's the mark of a true sambist." As Kolya looked around at his classmates, at the teachers who had watched him grow, at the underclassmen who looked up to him, he realized that his grandfather was right. The greatest victory hadn't been defeating Anton or Boris or Sergei. It had been defeating the part of himself that wanted to become like them. He'd learned that true strength wasn't about being the toughest person in the room. It was about using whatever power you